Hi, Professor Utzinger here again. Today we're going to talk about John Keats. We're going to talk about a brief letter that I had you read, and then also arguably his most famous poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, which some of you may have read at another point in your life, and I hope you enjoyed reading it again. A little background on Keats before we delve into the poem. One of the interesting things about many of the writers that we're going to be looking at this semester is that tragically a lot of them died when they were young. John Keats passed away when he was age 25 from tuberculosis. His parents both preceded him in death, as well as one of his beloved brothers who also died of tuberculosis. Shelley died at, when did Shelley die? When he was 29 in a sailing accident. Lord Byron fared a little bit better, but tragically he also passed away when he was 36, when he was training other soldiers during a revolution. So the idea of death and what lies beyond the grave and the afterlife is something that weighed heavy on a lot of these poets' minds, and again, tragically, a lot of them passed away when they were rather young. But let's take a look at Keats's letter that I had you look at for today. I actually have a collection of Keats' letters. It's in a book about this big. He was a rather prodigious letter writer, writing to loved ones and friends, and they are actually quite entertaining to read, and in a way serve as kind of a quasi autobiography, because we get to learn about what Keats is thinking about, what he's reading, what he's looking at in the world around him. In the letter that we had you read for today, probably one of his most famous because he uses a phrase, negative capability, which we'll look at here in a second. The first part of the letter, he's writing to his brothers, and he has recently seen a painting by Benjamin West, which was done in 1796, called Death on a Pale Horse. Make sure I got that name right. Yes, that's what he says, Death on a Pale Horse. And I would encourage you that after you finish watching the video to Google that. It is at the Detroit Institute Art Museum. Pretty spectacular looking painting, pretty harrowing as well. Death is personified, riding a pale horse, laying waste to everyone who lies in his path. And perhaps you caught from the letter, Keats isn't too impressed with the painting, not because of its artistry, but rather he feels like it's too disturbing. If you look at that phrase that he uses there, art is its intensity, capable of making all disagreeables evaporate from their being in close relationship with beauty and truth. And it's kind of ironic because that's what Keats says that he wants from artistic work, and perhaps what this painting for him is lacking. Even though the painting is purely imaginative, which is something that Keats and the other Romantic writers valued, he feels like there's not enough beauty incorporated into the painting to make it palatable. And he deals with that a little bit more in the Ode on a Grecian Urn that we're going to look at today. But before we transition to that, let's look at this most famous portion of this letter in which he says, I mean negative capability. That is when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So he's suggesting that what good art should do is embrace the idea of the unknowable, to embrace the idea that there is mystery in the world, and incorporate that into their artistic creations, whether that be visual art or written poems and other types of literature. So it's interesting to think about what exactly that would look like, celebrating the idea of the mysterious and the unknown. Now for Keats, nobody did it better than Shakespeare. All throughout his letters, he sings the praises of Shakespeare and really feels like if any writer has ever encompassed this idea of negative capability, it was William Shakespeare. Let us transition from this letter of Keats then to the poem Ode on a Grecian Urn. Keats wrote about 5 really well-known odes. He liked that format. And this one is divided into 5 stanzas. I would encourage you as you're reading poetry, if a poet ever gives you stanzas, different breaks, they look like if you sing hymns or take a look at song lyrics, we would call them verses, but they work in much the same way. We're going to take this one stanza by stanza and see what we can get out of this particular ode. I'm going to read the first couple of lines. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. So he introduces a couple of ideas that are really important to grasp onto at this point in the poem. The first one is that he is speaking to an urn. That's a photo that I took at the, I believe that one was from the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. The Blanton Museum in Austin also has in their permanent collection lots of Grecian urns. This is called an apostrophe, which is just a literary term for a poet or persona or narrator speaking to an object or a person that he or she knows can't actually hear them, right? It's just for poetic effect. And in this case, the persona of this poem, I like to envision, is holding an urn, an actual piece of pottery, and most Grecian urns have some sort of scene painted all the way around them of mythological characters typically. And so at the beginning of this poem, the persona sees a bride and calls her a still unravished bride. And really that word still is so crucial in this poem. He's emphasizing the point that the figures on the poem are still, they're not moving, but also the other shade of meaning in the word still. When you say to someone, oh, are you still on the computer? Are you still on the phone? Have you still not left? Right? So this idea that not in motion and yet never will be. These still figures will always be still. Then he uses some other language like sylvan and Arcady because he wants us to know that this is a scene that is set in a rural setting, right? That there's kind of forest and trees, which by now you may have realized settings in nature are what romantic poets value quite a bit. The last part of that stanza, there's another idea that I want to make sure you caught. It says, what men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? He's really just describing what he sees on that part of the urn. In stanza 2 then, he elaborates on some other things that he sees on the urn. And the first 2 lines of stanza 2 are some of my favorite. Heard's melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. So think about just for a second what that means. He's saying music that we hear is sweet. It's good. It's perfect. It makes us happy. And yet, this idea that on the urn we can see these figures playing musical instruments, but we can't actually hear them. And at least in this point of the poem, the persona privileges the idea of unheard music. The idea being that physical, literal music that we can hear is a good thing, but the music that we hear in our imagination, that we can make up on our own, is even sweeter. Pretty interesting idea. At the end of this stanza 2, he says, bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. But grieve not, she cannot fade, though thou hast not had thy bliss. So think about this. We got an image of a young man, and he's getting ready to kiss a young woman, and the persona seems to be arguing that that's the sweetest part of love, right? It's the promise of the kiss. Maybe even better than, 2 or 3 years into the relationship when this same couple is arguing about whose turn it is to pay the light bill or take out the trash, right? The messy part of love. The persona seems to be arguing at this point in time before they kiss, you just can't beat it. And he seems to envy these frozen figures on the urn. Does the same thing with trees, talks about the trees being in full bloom, and they'll never be able to lose their leaves. Now, if you're like me and you've spent a lot of your life in Texas, you might prefer autumn and winter to spring and summer. But think about it kind of in the long history of seasons being used symbolically. Springtime is the beginning of our lives, and then autumn and winter times are when we begin to age and we're near to death. So I think he's really also talking about this symbolically when we're young and we're healthy. And again, if you think about Keats's biography, of course, he probably doesn't know at this point when he's writing the poem that he will be dead at age 25, but he knows that his parents died relatively young. His brother is wasting away from disease. And at some point, even while Keats is writing, he realizes that the tuberculosis is beginning to take him over as well. And so you can see a poet wanting to write about how great it would be to be frozen when we're young and healthy. Stanza number 3 builds upon this idea, and actually in stanza 3 is when he mentions the leaves on the tree and the boughs, and that stanza just is talking about how happy all these scenes frozen in time seem to be. Stanza 4 begins to shift in tone. And a lot of times I encourage people when you're reading poetry, if the tone seems to shift, we call that the turn, right? And a lot of times the main idea of a poem can be discovered by looking at the turn. What is it that the poet is moving away from and moving towards? And in this case, it happens, I would argue, in stanza 4. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest? So we go from these happy scenes that he seems to relate to this idea of a mysterious priest and an animal being led to sacrifice. At least for the animal, this would be an unhappy, uncomforting type of situation. And what I like to think about with this stanza is Keats is really getting the reader to think about, okay, so it would be wonderful to be frozen in a happy point in life, but imagine your worst day of your life. What if you're trapped perpetually in that horrible time in your life? Now, I like to look at this in one of two ways. That maybe he is arguing, hey, if my wish came true and I was trapped for a period of time in my happiest part of my life, it seems like in the yin and the yang of our existence, that would mean that we would have to be trapped in the saddest part of our life for a long period of time as well. Now, I may be moving a little bit further outside of the poem than what Keats had intended, but I also like to think about that maybe if one person, myself, is trapped in the happiest part of his life for his entire life, does that mean to balance that out, somebody else has to be trapped in a miserable part of their life for the entirety of his or her life? Nonetheless, regardless of how you read this stanza, hopefully you can see it definitely shifts in tone. And in some way, he seems to be rejecting the idea that he lays out in the first 3 stanzas, that there is a possibility to be trapped always in the happiest part of life. Stanza 5 then really kind of summarizes what he's been talking about, but then introduces a couple of new ideas. Let's look in stanza 5, line 45. Cold pastoral. Well, actually, I'm going to skip up to 44. Thou silent form dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Cold pastoral. Seems to be rejecting in some ways the idea that what's frozen on this urn is a good blueprint for life. He calls it a cold pastoral, right? He says, hey, it's got these scenes from nature with all these people on it, but it's cold. And I would really encourage you to link that word cold back to that line in that word in the first line, still, right? The idea that there's no real warmth in this piece of art that he has been viewing and talking about. Somehow it leaves us sterile. It doesn't provide all of the answers. Which then leads us to the last several lines, which are quite ambiguous, and people have gone all different directions with these 2 lines. When old age shall this generation waste, right? This entire generation of people will ultimately pass on, make way for a new generation. thou shalt remain. So it seems to be speaking still to the urn. Even when I'm gone, this piece of artwork will remain, in the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. Really lovely lines. When we seek out the beauty in things, it reveals a truth, and that truth is beautiful. But I would ask you to spend some time thinking about who or what is speaking to whom or what. Right? In some ways, it can be the poet talking to this piece of artwork. Hey, that art contains beauty and truth. But it also seems to suggest that the urn is speaking to us as readers. That if we pursue beauty, we will find truth. If we pursue truth, we will find beauty. And so it's an intriguing idea to think about. Nonetheless, Keats is certainly investigating the beauty that we can find in different pieces of art, whether that be a physical urn or a physical poem that we're reading, and how that beauty reveals truth in our life. Hope you enjoyed thinking a little bit more about the poem and talking a little bit more about John Keats. I look forward to seeing what thoughts you have on both the letter and the poem. Thanks.